I'm Janell Blue, president of the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society and also the sponsor of this program. And today I'm with my co-host, Chuck Mason, and we're going to talk about something that every genealogist runs into. When you have your brick wall and you're just stumped, let's talk about the records and why you're not finding those, Chuck. You've got some ideas.
Yes, this program I called Don't Make These Mistakes.
Aha.
Particularly when you are new to genealogy, you don't necessarily know or understand everything. And so people sometimes make their own mistakes. As we had talked about in another program, my grandfather always said that his father was orphaned. And so I made the mistake of assuming orphaned, parents died, he was a young child, was probably put up for adoption, and his name probably originally wasn't Mason. So for years, I did not try to get beyond my great-grandparents. And once I finally did, I found no. And of course, I learned the legal term of orphan, which means somebody who loses a parent at any age. So as we talked about, at 54, I became an orphan when my father died. So people make those mistakes, or they don't understand things. They make assumptions. And so that may cause them to think, okay, I'm not going to go and look back. Or you hear something about records. For example, people assume that all of the 1890 census is gone. And that's not true. And I've run into people who won't go and look. There are small portions. They are very small.
Yes.
I think it's only 1 or 2 townships in one county in New Jersey that survived.
Right.
But if you have ancestors in that location, there's a census for you. So they look at that and assume things, and by incorrectly assuming things, they limit the records that they look at, and they make the mistake that causes them not to find information that they should be able to look at. And in other cases, they may limit the records that they look at. They may not dig into things like, when I talk about death records, people will look at or look for a death certificate, a death notice, and an obituary, and that's it. They don't go contact the cemetery or the funeral home, or look for a probate record and things like that are all related or a result of that death and can give you information. So they limit what they look at, and that's one of the things that we really need to totally understand the record creating process for each thing that we are looking at.
And the other place to look for a death record is a church. Sometimes those churches are not digitized. And so if there are churches around in that area, it's worth checking.
I also say, people will go, if there's a cemetery, they'll go look. But what about the membership records? They may make a notation when the person dies. You might have a case where you don't have a death certificate. They weren't being created then. The newspaper, they may not have put an obituary in. So you don't have a date. You can't find a tombstone with a date. Maybe in the church records, a notation was made when they died, because they're going to be dropped from the membership rolls.
The other thing that's important is that every state had a different time when they required some of these vital records. And so it's really important to either Google that, or you can go into National Genealogical Society has research in the states that'll tell you that. Our family search will tell you when they started. that doesn't mean they actually did it.
Yeah.
If you were living in a rural area, they may not
Exactly.
have complied,
Exactly.
but it's still important to
I
know.
always tell people, go to the Vital Records website for the state.
Good.
Because they generally give you everything,
Yes, the
when
history.
they started, how they're organized, where they're kept, and what it's going to cost to get a copy, what you have to do to get a copy, who's eligible, and those kinds of things. So another thing that I find people will do, they assume, and Vital Records is one of the assumptions, that they go way back. And so, they go and they look for records that were never created. We had a Pennsylvania group at the Fairfax Society, and we used to have, it's now part of the Mid-Atlantic group, but we used to have someone who used to lead a trip up to Harrisburg every fall and every spring. Well, she decided, I'm tired of doing this, so I took it over, and it was after the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and some other state groups merged into one research group. And so I was leading it. I had passed around the list of those who wanted to go, and I had taken it to the meeting, and I had a man sign up, and he came to me afterward, and he said, I can't wait until we go to Harrisburg. We were going to either the state archives or library there. They're both at one end or the other of the state legislature building there, close by. And he said, I need some birth certificates for my family. And I said, oh, okay. I said, you should be able to find those at the state archives, but for what time period? Well, the 1700s. And he was not happy when I explained to him that, yes, some of the large cities like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and some others, and some of the counties kept vital records, but it's not until 1906 that they began statewide from this day forward keeping vital records.
Yeah, required.
And there was nothing back in the 1700s. And so he said, well, where am I going to get records? And I said, do you know what church they went to? No. I said, if you can find out what church they may have gone to, you might find church records, but you're not going to find any vital records for that time period.
We've been talking about the United States, but also I was surprised when I was doing research in Prussian-occupied Poland that they started civil records in the mid-1800s.
Yeah.
And I was so surprised. And so what I found was that there was a record, a civil record and a church record. So don't just assume that these countries did the same thing that we do here in the States.
Yeah. Basically, it's really not until 1900 that we have the influence of the federal government trying to push the states to require vital records.
But they are a state decision.
Yes.
So those birth records, those death records, it's the state
that has the responsibility of when they begin, and but the federal government was trying to push as much as they could.
Right.
And so I'm fortunate in New Jersey. They're the second oldest continual ones, which means they started keeping vital records and they did not rescind the law, which some states did, like Virginia did that. They
rescinded it?
Yeah, Virginia kept vital records and then they rescinded the law, and then they but again, it's not until 1912, I believe it is. I believe it's the year before my mother-in-law was born that they started requiring birth records, because I think her sister was born in 1912 and I don't think she had one, but my mother-in-law had a birth certificate. And so I'm very fortunate in New Jersey that they kept them beginning May 1st, 1848. My mother's side is Philadelphia, so about 1860, the city started keeping them. So I have pretty good, records there. But again, even though the law was there to require the keeping of the records, what happened? Did the clerk in the county do their job? I had one, I forget the county, it's one of the northern counties in New Jersey, that I got into this family in New Jersey that I was just trying to, I think it was looking for possibly using them as an example in a lecture or an article. And I found that the couple married about 1870, bought a house, lived in that house all of their life. The house went out of the family's ownership when the second spouse, I forget which was the husband or the wife, died last, and the house was sold. They had 4 children. They had a boy, a girl, a boy, a girl. Went into the vital records. The 2 boys were registered. The 2 girls were not.
There you go.
And so there was the law of requiring starting in 1848, but in the 1870s they did not comply on 2 occasions. So it's one of those things that you really have to look at and examine for your individual ancestors what is available.
In other words, don't take anything for granted.
Don't take it for granted.
Some states, I don't know about New Jersey, but in Texas, the one vital that the state kept were marriage records.
Yes. Almost every place, almost all of the original 13 colonies, they kept marriage records. That's the one record that you find in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania. They go back actually when the 2 states were actually colonies.
Oh my goodness.
And I found most of the other originals have them either in colonial time or right after they became a state. So marriage was one of the things, it gets into property laws and things like that, and wanting to be sure that the husband can support a family and those kinds of issues. So one of the other things that I find people do is they restrict the records that they will search. They have their comfort zone. They're going to select these records, and they're not going to look at anything else. Or they say, well, I don't expect to find this. I had this with a lady who was part of that Pennsylvania group when I actually started it years ago. And she had a family that lived in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, just below Philadelphia there on the Delaware River, and they moved out to Lancaster. Well, she found the man on the tax records, and he was paying taxes on a number of animals. He had horses, cows, chickens, pigs, and he's paying taxes on it. But she assumed that he didn't own property. She had a deed where when he moved out to Lancaster County, he bought land. She assumed he didn't own land in Delaware County. And I kept saying to her, and I knew she was talking to 2 other people in the group asking the same questions, and they were basically telling her the same thing. Sue Ellen, this man is not, even if he's in a city, he's got to have some kind of property, because he's not raising all these animals out in the backyard. He's got to have a piece of property. So he's either bought it or he's renting it.
Right.
If he's renting it, you're not going to find anything. If he has bought it, there should be a deed.
Right.
And she kept saying, but I don't think he, and she kept coming back to me and asking me. And at one point, I even went online and I found the roll number of film from the Family History Center that had the deeds for the time period he was living in Delaware County, that she just needed to go to a Family History Center, order it, and have it come in and look at it. And she still didn't do it. And one night she came to a meeting and she hit me on the wrong night. And I said, Sue Ellen, I have told you what to do.
Right.
And I told her the other two. I know they have told you the same thing. I got you the information to get the film. Until you go get the film and look at it and find out he does not have property in Delaware County, don't come ask me again.
Yeah. So she
Well,
did it?
I don't remember. 6 months later, she came into the meeting and she said, guess what? He did own land in Delaware County. And it's like, that's what I've been telling you for the last year and a half, 2 years. You know, but she just assumed. So you don't want to do that.
And you know, I think sometimes people don't do those kind of things because they're not familiar with either the courthouse where the deeds are or going to a family search library. Now, of course, in today's world, you can't do that anymore because they don't, the film isn't transferred back and forth.
But you can go online now, which they're putting.
If it's digitized, you can.
They're digitizing. And I don't know where they are in completing that project. I haven't really seen anything. But you know, people will also, like you say, they get comfortable.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a comfort issue with her because she had done
that
for Lancaster County and found where he had bought the land. So, you know, it was just she wanted to assume. And I always tell people, you don't go looking for the ridiculous things. But if there is a chance, you go look. That way you know there is or there isn't a record and you can move on. You're not sitting there wondering, do I have this record out there?
I have an ancestor who had a land grant and he, you know how you have to go find the land, you have to have it surveyed, it takes a few years to get that done. The day, so if I had stopped there, I would have said he lived, you know, in this part of Trinity County. Well, in fact, the day that he got full title to it, he sold it. That same day, and he moved into town. And had I just stopped with that one thing, you know, I would have been misled.
That's why I always tell people with land records, you have the deed where they bought it and the deed where they sold it. And you look at what are they selling, does it match the acreage that they bought? If it doesn't match, then there are more deeds. They have sold it off in pieces. And to know the whole picture, you want a deed with what they bought and a deed or deeds that totals the acreage of what they originally bought. Then you have the complete picture.
Right. And I think if anybody is hesitant or intimidated about doing search in a courthouse, you know, call them up and ask them what they have available, what you need to do to get that, and how far the records go back.
Yeah, and particularly older deeds are more likely going to be in an archives.
They're not necessarily going to be on that website where that shows what the deeds. You're going to have to physically go there.
They may be in an archives, and usually they are used to genealogists coming in, and so they're going to be very helpful.
Yeah. And that's the key, is ask for help.
Yeah, and it just depends. I mean, I went into Gloucester County, New Jersey, looking for older deeds. And I knew they were microfilmed and available other places, but I was there looking for something that wasn't on microfilm, and then I was tracing it back. And they had, these were 1830s or 40s deeds. And the staff was still very helpful in helping me to find them because they had a different system of how they were filing them and all.
Yeah, so it's worth asking.
Yes. Another thing is people form a theory and they never consider any others. You know, we're often trying to figure out what our ancestors did. So we have to hypothesize or form a theory of what did they do, what happened. And then we have to go and prove it. And if it doesn't prove out, people don't think about, okay, what are the other possibilities? You know, what have they possibly done? You know, they may have done something outside the norm. I had a friend probably 20 years ago was tracing a line in her family. It was 3 brothers that started out here in Virginia and moved to Kentucky and moved to Missouri and ended up in Nebraska. But looking at the census records and the children, her direct ancestor had 2 children that were born in Indiana.
Ooh.
Now, all the other children followed that migration pattern. The 2 brothers' children followed that migration pattern. And it was consistent in every census that they were recorded. They were born in Indiana. And she said, "What do you think?" And I said, "I think you need to go to Indiana."
Yeah,
you know.
think they were
And
born
so
in-
she did. I forget how she found the county that they were in. Well, lo and behold, they were trying to encourage people to settle in an area of Indiana, so land was cheap. This one brother decided he was going to take off, leave the rest of the family, so he and his children and his wife went to Indiana, bought a piece of land, started farming it, and they ended up having a drought one summer, and they lost the farm. They couldn't pay. They did, the crops didn't grow. They had nothing to sell. They lost the farm. They went back to Nebraska, where they had 2 more children. So, that was something unusual.
Yeah.
As I said to her, I said, if it had been 1 census
Yeah.
or maybe 2,
Right.
I might have thought, but that to me said, you need to look at Indiana, because it was, I forget, I think both the children lived to be in their late 60s, early 70s. So you had a number of census records that were saying that. So it's important that you take and look at every possible record that may be out there.
I have an example too of an 1850 census where my great-grandfather was listed as a young man, and then there were these other children who were listed, and I didn't recognize their names, but there it was, and that was all I had. Absolutely all. You don't find them ever again. And so I assumed that he had 3 siblings. Well, when we started doing some DNA and started contacting people who were cousins, I found that there was another sister who was not in the 1850 census, who was older than him. And of course, now the question is, where was she and why wasn't she in that? But she is definitely related, and she was definitely a sister. And that's the beauty of some of the DNA cousin work, is that they can tell you what her name is, where she fit, the whole thing.
Yeah.
So, that limited me for a long time.
Yeah. Another thing that people will do is they'll either excuse or ignore conflicting evidence. You have, well, and census records is one of the things. I mean, not everything is perfectly recorded in the census or accurately recorded in the census.
That's right.
But you will have people that will have information, and they will just make up an excuse of why it doesn't match what it should, or everything that it should, or they'll just totally ignore it. They'll just say, "Oh well, So,
but that makes the case for not just looking at 1 census or 2, but look at every one that's available.
Yeah. I always say with census, look at every one, and don't write off that they got missed in the census if you don't find them where they are supposed to be. I have a great-grandfather that did get missed in the 1910 census. And I know that because I have looked at every index I could find. I have looked in the household of every family member, not just children and grandchildren. He had 1 or 2 siblings still living. I looked at their children. I looked at their grandchildren. I looked literally at the censuses. And then I finally decided, because the family lived in Vineland and Landis Township, which Landis Township surrounded Vineland about 2/3 of the way around. And eventually, in the 1950s, it was made a part of the city of Vineland. But I looked line by line on the 1910 census for every household in Vineland and Landis Township. And I did that partially because I knew I was going to find a lot of collateral family members, because I knew we had a lot of family down there. So that was a purpose. I looked, and when I got that, I thought, okay, he was truly missed. His wife died before 1900. He was living with a son in 1900. He was living with a daughter in 1920. And, I wonder if, was he going back and forth between his children's households, and neither one of them thought to include him because he wasn't living there at the time.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll never know exactly why he was missed, but he was missed.
Yep.
My grandmother had a sister who, she was born in Philadelphia. She married her first husband, and in 1920, she and her first husband are in the census. I couldn't find her in 1930. When 1940 census came out, I found her back in Philadelphia living with her second husband. And I couldn't find her. I played with the census, but I was making one mistake. I kept saying Philadelphia or Pennsylvania for the location. Oh. When I put her name in and I didn't specify a location, up she popped in Camden, New Jersey, living with some cousins. She was divorced from her first husband.
Oh, maybe she changed her last name too?
No, she still had her first husband's name, because I played with that. I tried the name too. So we really want to look at all the possibilities before we say we can't find records.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's really, really important. Oh my goodness, we're just about out of time, and we still have plenty more to talk about. So we'll have to pick this up in another show. But
yes.
I'm just delighted to be able to talk about some of these things, because I find them to be very helpful, and I hope our viewers do too. I just want to also welcome you to the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society. Our meetings are on Zoom right now. Go to our website. It's up on the screen. We would love for you to participate, and who knows, maybe we can help you find that cousin that you can't find. So thanks, Chuck. Thank you very much.
Janell.